as Shuli mentioned at the beginning, we are now on the occasion of the 4th anniversary of Tzuk Eitan. It's also on the eve of the 4th anniversary of the murder and the abduction of the remains of Hadar Golden in violation of what was a United Nations mandated humanitarian ceasefire brokered by the United States, supported by the European Union, and therefore engages the responsibility thereby of the international community. For 4 years now, there have been continuing standing violations of international humanitarian law, which I will briefly summarize. And they apply both to the Oren, Shaul, and Hadar Golden, and also to the missing civilians held in captivity by Hamas. The first is the refusal by Hamas to share any information whatsoever, violating the right of the families to know, and this being a foundational violation of international humanitarian law. Second, the refusal to patriate the remains of the Chalalim. This, the international community, the Red Cross, has referred to as the most compelling obligation under international humanitarian law, which daily is violated by the refusal to patriate the remains. Third, the violation of the principle of respect for the remains of the deceased, a fundamental human dignity principle. Four, the violation of principles of freedom of religion, which are in Islam, which are in Judaism, the right to bury according to one's own religious tradition. Fifth, and very often ignored, and that is the Palestinian Authority became a state party to the Rome Statute, to the International Criminal Court, on the grounds that it represents the Palestinian people as a whole, including Gaza Palestinians. Therefore, the Palestinian Authority also has an obligation to ensure that the remains are patriated. All the obligations incurred by Hamas are also the obligations of the Palestinian Authority. And this must not be forgotten. I might add that under the International Criminal Court of Rome Statute, there is a specific provision, a human dignity provision regarding respect for the remains of the deceased. So let me close by saying, because Shula began and Amir Peretz began in terms of what can be done, I want to mention a few things in particular. Because this was a violation of a humanitarian ceasefire, as I said, mandated by the UN, it becomes a violation of the principle of international peace and security under the UN, and therefore the UN, in all its organs, Security Council, General Assembly, has a responsibility to address and redress this standing violation. Second, the European Union, and I had the pleasure of appearing with Leah Golden there, just as we had appeared earlier before the UN Security Council. If you look at the European Union, all its mandates, there are basically three principles there. One, the promotion and protection of human rights. Two, compliance with international humanitarian law. Three, combating the culture of impunity. All these three foundational principles of the European Union are engaged by the cases before us, and in particular by the case of Hadar Golden because of the violation of humanitarian ceasefire. And therefore, the European Union has a responsibility itself in terms of its own mandates to ensure that these humanitarian obligations are respected and fulfilled. Three, the Palestinian Authority must be addressed directly on this issue. Up to now, for 4 years, they have been given a pass, as if they're not involved in it. They can't have it both ways. The Palestinian Authority cannot enter, and increasingly do so, international agencies, including also international humanitarian agencies, on the grounds that they represent the Palestinian people, and yet not have any obligations with respect to that representation. And so the international community and those purporting to speak on its behalf must call upon the PA to address and redress. The fourth thing is to involve countries that have leverage with Hamas, such as Egypt, to exercise that leverage, and there are ways to have that leverage exercised. And finally, the point that has been mentioned, we are now on the threshold of a series of plans regarding the provision of humanitarian assistance to Gaza. Any humanitarian assistance to Gaza must, I say must, factor in the issue of these humanitarian obligations. Otherwise, we are giving Hamas and those there a free pass once again. As Leah Golden has put it, humanitarian obligations versus humanitarian obligations. And while I agree with Shula that Israel has, of course, a responsibility, if we think only in terms of Israel's responsibility, we're going to let the international community off the hook. And they have to bear their responsibilities. They have to be reminded daily of those responsibilities. And we will try to do it as best we can, whether it be the United Nations, the European Union, the Palestinian Authority, members of the international states in the international community like Egypt and the like. So kol hakavod for everyone who's come here today, because the voices here individually and collectively are part of that critical mass of advocacy that will bring the remains of Oren Sholem Hadar Golden home and will free the missing captives. Tada.